wanted to just welcome everyone and let you know we have a really nice, intimate group today. So we will have lots of time for discussion. And so we'll have a chance to do that after our presenters make their presentations. So I've got 30 minutes for that. And so what I would like to do right now is to turn the microphone over to Katie Welter. And Katie's going to tell us about her amazing project she's been working on called the McGinnis Gym in Buena Vista. So Katie, thank you so much for joining us. Please give everyone a little bit of background on you, and then we will pull up your slides and let you present that way.
Great. And then Bianca, I put the link in the chat. I don't know if you were able to see that. And
yep.
Open that up.
Yeah, so, I can see it. I can share it now.
Great. Well, thanks, Ariel, and everyone for having me. And I'm gonna share some hopefully helpful information and just pause and let me know if you have questions. And Bianca, I don't know if you can put that into slideshow mode, just so folks. I'm happy for people to see my notes, but they might be a distraction during the presentation. It's just up there.
I already shared the PowerPoint. Can you see it now?
Yeah, and if you could click on slideshow up at the top, then it won't show the notes.
Oh, wait.
Sorry.
Right.
Technical.
Oh, this one. Sorry.
Yeah. No worries. Great. Okay. We can go to the next slide. So my name is Katie Welter. I'm an attorney by trade, but I'm here in my capacity as a founding director of Watershed Inc., which is a nonprofit that aims to rehabilitate historic community assets and return them to community use. The community asset I'm really excited to talk with you and anyone else who will listen about today is the McGinnis Gymnasium in Buena Vista, where I live. The goal of this project, just in a nutshell, is to remediate and rehabilitate the 5,400 square foot gym for public, recreational, and performing arts use in our town. And before I go into more detail, I do just want to acknowledge we've had a number of just like amazing partners on this project that have helped us get as far as we have. So I just want to note them there, and the top folks are most intimately involved. And then, you know, we have some professional service providers, including Plant Moran and Timberline Law, and then of course our state and federal agencies that have been really instrumental so far. Could go to the next slide, please. I'll show you what the gym looks like. So you can see here, this is the McGinnis Gym. It's the building in the rear, which was constructed in 1936. It was a Depression era New Deal project funded by a federal agency, the Public Works Administration. It was built as an addition to what was then the K-12 school, and that was housed in the large building at the front there, which itself, as you might be able to tell, was originally a courthouse. The gym was built to serve all kinds of general assembly needs, so everything from basketball games to plays and choir concerts, but also graduation ceremonies, funerals, reunions, every possible general assembly you can imagine for many decades were held in this gym, so it's a very important community asset. We can go to the next slide. This is just another picture. This is 1958, about 20 years after the gym was built. You can see again that it's just a fixture of our community. The school is no longer in that courthouse building. However, Bianca, if you go to the next slide, show you all just a bird's eye view so you can get a sense that the gym is still very close to our elementary school. So along the bottom, you can see our town's main street, and then the big white roof is our elementary school. And then right across the road along the drop-off route there is the McGinnis Gym. And I share this with you because its proximity to the elementary school is part of what made it a great opportunity and a real need for rehabilitation. I can go to the next slide. So this is the gym today. Sadly, it's not in great shape anymore. The windows are boarded, much of the glass is broken, the walls are shabby. And again, this is right across from the elementary school. It's something all of our families, the buses, everybody passes by every day. And then most critically, the roof, which is highly deteriorated and contains about, as we now know, about 6,500 square feet of friable asbestos containing material. And so that is an active pollutant actually in our community, not to mention just an eyesore. Go to the next slide. This shows you that there's also a major structural issue with the building. The north wall here is a large crack. You can see daylight through it. The cause of that crack, we've learned, is that the stage was built above the old outhouses that were there in the 1800s, and so unstable soils underneath that. But it's a relatively easy fix, we've learned. It just looks really bad. Then one more photo on the next slide, just so you can get a peek at the interior. It's a great gym. It has high ceilings and these cool acoustic panels made out of Celotex, which was a popular material at the time. The maple floor is in great shape. We'll be able to restore that. And once the boards are removed from the windows, it actually will have really wonderful light inside. And again, the purpose of this project is to rehabilitate it for its original use, which I would just say is really the easiest way to deal with a historic building, is to just rehabilitate it for its original use. Just to bring you up to speed on to the current times with this project, which has a long history, it was used as a primary recreational space for many decades until 2008, when the Colorado Department of Public Safety deemed it safe only for storage. It does remain vacant to this day. In 2020, after many years of hand-wringing over what to do with this building, the Buena Vista School Board put out a call for help. They basically asked for proposals to acquire a number of underutilized properties, including the gym, in helping them address their needs. Our district, like many in Colorado, is underfunded, understaffed, and yet we're a growing community with lots of young families. So we and my fellow directors were really intrigued by this when the school just said, does anybody want to help us with this? And so if we go to the next slide, we'll walk through what we learned about the project. So we conducted pretty extensive due diligence to understand what would it take to put this building back into use, and use not just by anyone, but by our most vulnerable and I think valued community members, young children who are the primary users. It will be an elementary school gym, as well as the Boys and Girls Club, which currently operates out of the hallways of our elementary school because our facilities are so overprogrammed. Then we have many retirees who are looking forward to having more pickleball courts and other indoor recreational space. So we really wanted to think, like, what do we need to do to make this safe, standing for another century? And this is the list of what we are going to approach, and then a sort of a schematic design or floor plan pictured there on the right. Number one is remediating all the hazardous materials, which include the asbestos in the roof, as well as some locations inside, lead in the paint and the interior of the building, some mold in the bathrooms. So that's a major undertaking that has to be addressed before really anything else happens with the building. We're going to replace that roof after we remove all of those materials and dispose of them properly. We'll replace the roof with the historically accurate standing seam metal roof, which will look really nice and complement the other buildings in that campus. Obviously address that crack on the north wall. We also learned that the roof is just sitting on the walls of the gym. It's not attached in any way, so we're gonna have to do that. But the good thing is we're removing the roof, and so we'll have great access to make those repairs. Repointing or tuck pointing all the concrete and brick masonry on the exterior. The bathrooms are a disaster, so it's an opportunity to put in modern restrooms, ADA, upgrade all the mechanical sewer, water, etc. Restore the historic steel windows, which actually are in great shape other than the glass being broken. And then of course refinish the wood floor and install things like basketball hoops. So not a small task list. So once we kind of wrapped our arms around that, we had to think about how are we going to approach this legally and then from a finance and funding standpoint. Initially, our approach was going to be with a for-profit entity. We have local investors who have had an interest in acquiring and rehabilitating the gym through an opportunity zone fund. The gym is located within an opportunity zone. That way they could use tax deferred capital gains. And I'm not going to go too much into that, but I gather since this is a tax credit connection webinar that folks are interested in that. And from the beginning, we always knew that we wanted a public-private partnership with the school district. We needed the school district to commit funds and also commit to repurchasing the building. We didn't want to be operating a gym. We wanted to bring our expertise and experience in preservation and project management to bear on the project. So that was always part of the structure. The advantages of the for-profit entity approach were, again, taking advantage of those deferred capital gains, which under current legislation, the deferral is till 2027. And then also, of course, we could really maximize those any tax credits we would receive, because you could use the tax credits to directly offset the tax liability. Wouldn't have to sell as many of the tax credits in that case. And then we initially thought that this approach would make the project eligible for the federal preservation tax credits, which are substantial in this case. If we're looking at about just very roughly at that time, we're thinking a $2 million project, we could be talking about $400,000 in federal tax credits. And then it would also be eligible for state historical fund grants and state preservation tax credits. We worked through this with Plant Moran, which I can't recommend enough, which is a national accounting and consulting firm. And they have some folks who have expertise in particular, opportunity zone funds and federal preservation tax credits. And they helped us work through some of the pros and cons, and some of the disadvantages were that the project would then be ineligible for EPA or CDPH brownfield grants. Also, foundation funding, if we were to pursue that. There's a longer holding period required through the Opportunity Zone Fund of 10 years. That wasn't as attractive. Of course, as a for-profit entity owning the property, it would be subject to property tax, all the materials purchases subject to sales tax, and then the tax credits themselves would be and the rent from the school would be subject to income tax. So Plant Moran helped us compute all of that. I can't say that I did that myself. But then really the death knell of this approach was that we learned with Plant Moran's help that the leasing and selling the gym back to the school would disqualify it for that federal preservation tax credit. Just a quick thumbnail on that is that you only qualify for federal preservation tax credits if you're a taxpayer, and because we would be selling the property back to a non-tax-paying entity that had previously used and owned the building, the IRS treats that the same as if the school district were applying themselves. So that made the project less attractive as a for-profit entity. Then we turned to the ultimate approach that we went with and we're pursuing now, which is we formed a nonprofit entity, a 501c3 public charity. We acquired the property from the school district for $1. Then we also entered into a development agreement and what's called a lease purchase agreement, which in a nutshell requires us to rehabilitate the gym. So that's our big promise. We will fix it up. the school district agreed to pay $1 million in the form of rent. I put that in quotes because it's really a loan. It's really a loan that our organization is making to the school district. There's interest built into that amount as well, plus a 5% developer fee. It's 5% of gross costs on the project. And then the school essentially promised to repurchase the building within 10 years. Advantages to that approach were eligible for all the state tax credits, preservation and remediation, eligible for the state and federal grants, as well as foundation grants, no property sales or income tax. So we have to sell the tax credits, but we don't pay any tax on that. So that's a positive. And then, you know, an important detail on this was that the lease purchase avoids Tabor. I don't know if you're familiar with Tabor, but it's part of the Colorado Constitution that says that public entities cannot borrow money without taxpayer approval, voter approval. And so the school district, they wanted to put $1 million toward the project, but they didn't have $1 million in cash. And so by structuring this payment from them in the form of a lease, it's not treated as a loan, but it still allows them to contribute a significant amount of money over time. And that was really attractive to the school district and to us. The major disadvantages are that we have to sell the tax credits and at that 10 to 15% discount. And then also the project no longer qualifies for federal preservation tax credit. That's completely off the table. Ariel had asked if I could present just sort of the funding mix that's going into this project currently. Our cost estimate we're working with right now, and this is of course subject to change, especially in our current world, is $2.3 million, and that's for everything: the remediation, the infrastructure, drainage, you know, basketball hoops. And the mix, I've presented 3 different kind of scenarios here: best case, middle case, worst case. You can see in all scenarios, we've got the school district's contribution, the $1 million plus the developer fee. We are assuming preservation tax credits will come through. The only difference on those amounts has to do with the amount that the rate at which we might be able to sell them. State Historical Fund grant, we applied for a $250,000 grant in early October. We have built into our timeline that if we're unsuccessful this round, we can go back in the spring after we incorporate feedback. And so we're hopeful about that. And then in the best case scenario, we have an EPA Brownfields grant, which I have a very flat number there because we're working on that budget still. Of $500,000. We'll be applying for that next month. If our backup plan, if the EPA Brownfields grant doesn't come through, and it's highly competitive, so we don't have any like illusions about that grant, is to pursue a state Brownfields grant, which would be somewhat smaller, as well as those state remediation tax credits on any amounts we're ultimately responsible for. And the great thing about that is it kind of allows us to hedge and still move forward with the project and commit to our contractors and say, yeah, we're going to do it one way or another. Best case scenario, we actually may come out ahead and we'll utilize funds to seed another project. And in the other scenarios, you know, we do have some safety valves to do what's called value engineering, essentially just say, well, you know, some of the materials we're going to use maybe won't be the longest lasting and most expensive materials. But in worst case scenario, we would explore possibly phasing the project. So that's a lot of information. I'm not going to go through this list, but I wanted you to have it, just a summary of the funding sources we're pursuing. And then just the last slide, Bianca, if you want to go to the next page, I did just want to hit on some of the lessons we've learned so far. number one for us has been our partnership with the school district. This has just been there. We've learned that many public entities like our school district own these properties that have a lot of challenges, but also great community value. And they just don't have the capacity to rehabilitate them. But they may have significant funds to anchor the project, which is really attractive in your grant application and other fundraising efforts. And we don't even have an assistant superintendent. We have one person in our finance department. This is just beyond their capacity. Number two, ask for help, especially from public employees. Both the public employees on the phone or on this webinar today, Sarah and Ted, have been instrumental in our project. Sarah came out and did a site visit several months ago, and this was just very speculative, enormously helpful in building our confidence about how to approach the project. I'm also a big believer in spending the money up front to hire some people who know what they're doing. So CPAs, attorneys, architects, whatever your project requires, like get someone really good. They might charge just like a mind-boggling rate, but 3 hours of, like our Plant Moran CPA, his name's Gordon Goldie, 3 hours of his time is well worth the money. Get quality assessments really early. We were really fortunate that the State Historical Fund had already paid for a historic structure assessment of the gym. So we had a good idea of the condition it was in. We were also very fortunate that the EPA, through the TBA program that I think Ted will talk about, they contracted directly with an environmental consultant to do environmental assessments for us. They helped us define the project scope and also have been just really key supporting documents in our grant applications. If you're doing a project like this that has a lot of moving parts and funding sources, you really have to start early. You have to assume that a grant cycle will take 12 to 18 months from the preparation to the point when funds will be released, and just be realistic about that. Approach community partners really early on, keep them informed. We just, as an example, the pickleballers I mentioned earlier, we have a vibrant pickleball community, and they're so excited about this because they only have 2 indoor, this is going to double their indoor pickleball space. And while they don't have funds to contribute, their membership is a lot of impressive retirees. We have nationally competitive athletes and a federal judge, and they've just been like really out there and helping put out good words on our behalf and have strong networks. So also it's just encouraging. And then lastly, you know, it's more work, but you really need to build in a funding backup plan. And so that I tried to kind of show that in that funding mix, and build your timeline around that funding backup plan. So like I said, our timeline is to start construction next summer, which will allow us to go back for other funding sources if some of our primary sources don't come through. That was a lot of information. So does anyone have any questions at this point?
That was so wonderful, Katie. I really appreciate you taking the time to walk us through all that, and the photos were fantastic to see all of the people using it back anywhere from 50 to 70 years ago. I just would, if there aren't questions right now, we'll definitely have time to have our participants kind of introduce themselves and what they're working on if they have a specific project, and we can have a discussion. Are you guys getting feedback? Because I'm hearing feedback as I'm talking. No? Okay, great. It's just me.
This is Stephen. Just when you were talking, Ariel.
Just when I'm talking.
Presentation was good.
Okay, I'll try not to talk very much. That will be better. So I'm going to introduce Ted Lanzano. And Ted, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at EPA, and I will hit my mute.
Yes, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen here, so just give me 1 second and then I will get started. This is always challenging for me. So can you see that okay?
Yep,
Great.
we can see it.
We just go to view mode here. Let's see. Okay, great. Well, thank you. And that was a great, sorry, I'm just trying to get back here. Okay. Sorry with the presentation there. It's always challenging to share screens, but thank you for the introduction. My name is Ted Lanzano. I'm a Brownfields project manager with EPA in Region 8. And it's great to be here to talk with all of you today. And I've been very fortunate to be working with Katie on the school project, on the gymnasium project, and she's done a great job with it so far. And yes, fingers crossed for a successful EPA grant proposal this fall. I wanted just to start out with kind of, it may not be known exactly. We use this term frequently and loosely sometimes, and I just wanted to kind of thought it might be helpful just to clarify what exactly is a brownfield when we're talking about that. And the simplest definition that we have is property where real or perceived contamination is inhibiting the reuse of that property. It could be that there's real contamination, known contamination, like the asbestos that's in the McGinnis School that Katie just mentioned, that is really affecting how that property can be reused. Or it could be that there's kind of the perception of contamination in a property. Maybe there's an old gas station and you just think that there's something going on there. So as a result, the property is not being used to its fullest extent. Either way, that's the EPA definition of a brownfield. And they can really come in many different forms. They could be an old gas station, it could be a building with asbestos, scrap yards, sawmills, vacant lots, you name it. But the common element here is that there's real or perceived contamination that's making it so these properties aren't used to their fullest extent. And that's really what EPA's program is all about, is providing resources for environmental assessments and environmental cleanups to remove the environmental challenge and the cost associated with redeveloping these properties so they can be put back into productive use and be kind of like the gym that Katie is working towards. We are very fortunate in this past year to be, EPA is fortunate to be the recipient of $1.5 billion. Yes, that's billion with a B, which we don't ever see in our program. So for an additional funding over the next 5 years. So that translates into $300 million each year of additional funding, plus our regular appropriations. So all told, over the next 5 years, that'll be $1.2 billion in additional projects for grants. So now, if you're pondering whether or not to move forward with your brownfields project, now really is a great time to do that. And I just wanted to review kind of quickly some of the grant resources that we have available to communities. And the eligible entities for the grants that I have on this page are really just the public entities like states, tribes, cities, counties, nonprofits, redevelopment agencies. And the first grant I'll talk about are just our direct cleanup grants. And you can apply up to $1.5 million, and there's no cost share. And that is the one that I believe Katie is going to be applying for. Probably not the full 1.5 million, but it'll be that grant type. We also have assessment grants. Those are those are used to conduct environmental assessments at multiple properties. $1 million for a coalition of governments. $500,000 for a single entity to conduct assessments across their area. And then we have $2 million directly to states and tribes for statewide or tribal-wide assessment grants. And then we have multi-purpose grants, which is used for assessment and cleanup. So the proposals for all of these, our open period is actually right now, and the proposals are due on November 23rd. Although it may be the 22nd, so you'll need to check the guidelines yourself to make sure on that. And if you don't want to apply for a grant, if that's just all sounding too overwhelming, it's very understandable. We also have some great technical assistance that's not a grant. It's use of the EPA contractors. And the first one that I wanted to talk about is what Katie is also the recipient of, is the targeted brownfields assessments, or we call them TBAs. And that's basically when you complete a very, very simple online application, and we're able to use our EPA contractors to conduct an environmental assessment on your behalf at zero cost to you. And, environmental assessments can be very expensive. To hire a professional company and go out to your town and do all the do the sampling and analysis, that could easily run $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. And so this is a great resource that we have to support you with the environmental assessments. And we also have another type of technical assistance called our land revitalization technical assistance. And this is for communities that might have like one or more brownfields, either like part of a corridor or kind of like a downtown. But they're all kind of stuck. And like, it's kind of like before you even want to move forward with an assessment, you're just like, well, what could we possibly do with this? And what does the community want to do with this? And so we have consultants available, mostly who are architects, who kind of support the community with visioning and community engagement activities to figure out what the reuse could be. And then they develop some really lovely conceptual site drawings of what that could look like. And then all of that kind of helps jumpstart the sort of the brownfields redevelopment process. I just wanted to conclude with a really neat project we're working on right now. It's the Fox West Theater, and we're partnering with the City of Trinidad and Urban Neighborhoods, and then also History Colorado on this project. And the City of Trinidad acquired the historic Fox Theater several years ago. It had been vacant for a number of years and slowly deteriorating, but it's a lovely theater right on Main Street that holds up to about 600 people and was widely used back in the day. And they're moving forward with redeveloping this. And the first hurdle that they had to deal with was the environmental contamination. And so we provided them a $500,000 grant to do the, it's kind of, there was a lot of the normal type of cleanup work, asbestos abatement on the water pipes and in the boiler, and some lead-based paint abatement. But this one has been so unique. We've also had to deal with bird droppings on the historic scenery and on the historic theaters, or excuse me, the historic curtains, and have professional conservators who are experienced with that kind of historic stage equipment do the cleanup. And then the other most recent one that we've had to deal with is the main stage curtain, and you can see at the bottom there it says asbestos, and that was some of the curtains used back in the day had asbestos to suppress fire in the event of a fire. But a lot of these curtains have deteriorated over the years. They have tremendous historic value, but they could be releasing asbestos fibers. So there are professional conservators that are able to encapsulate these and restore them so they could be reused. And the EPA grant funds have been used for that, which is a very unique but an interesting way to use the grant funds. So the best way to get started is probably just give me a call if you'd ever like to chat about your project. I'd love to chat, and we can go into more details about how these resources can be used for you. So feel free to contact me, and Ariel, that's all I had for now.
Great. Thank you so much, Ted. That was fantastic. And I just really have to commend our regulators as being so approachable and easy to work with. The other person on the environmental side, Fonda Apostolopoulos from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, couldn't be here today, and I'm going to go over at the end a little bit of information that he has, but he's super helpful and approachable, as is Sarah, who's going to be talking to us next. So I'd like to introduce Sarah Kappel from History Colorado for her to talk about the kinds of funding that's available for the historic part of these projects.
Hi, everyone. So I felt like I needed a few slides, so I do have a few slides. So let's see if I can do the screen share and if I'm successful. Am I successful? All right, excellent. All right, so I'll make this snappy too, so we have time to chat. So my name is Sarah Kappel. I work here at the State Historic Preservation Office in downtown Denver. I do live in Lyman. I like to throw that out. So I do understand and can relate to the rural communities that, really struggle pulling their funding and incentives together. So I'm kind of new to this position, but my title is Tax Credits and Incentives. Here at History Colorado, we felt, some of these projects really don't have the capacity to really understand what's available to them. And so my role mainly is the tax preservation tax credit reviewer for the state. And then I do the initial review for the federal tax credits prior to sending them out to Washington, D.C. for the final say. And I also talk about the State Historical Fund grant. So I'm a little of everything, and I'm also trying to fill in this area of kind of the unknowns, such as EPA, Brownsville, sustainability grants and funding, and all those sorts of items that really pair well with our historic buildings. So really quickly, the State Historical Fund grants, as Katie mentioned, she is going for both the grants and the state tax credits. So they range from $1 to $250,000. They mostly go for projects that have strong public benefits, which really makes it appealing for public entities and nonprofits. However, we do provide grants to private owners, but we really emphasize that public benefit. We're really for competitive preservation work. So it's always good to have a conversation with us to make sure that we are capitalizing on all those needs that you do have and make it appealing to reviewers, since this is a competitive program. And then we also have various grants for planning and assessment work. So it's not always about, that brick and mortar work. Then, like I said, I also manage the state tax preservation tax credit. We do both commercial and residential. I think, the commercial part is the most appealing for this conversation. It depends on where you live, if you're in a rural versus urban, if you're going to get that 30 to 35% commercial tax rate back. And then it does cap at $1 million. So I think the magical number is 3.6 million as your project total that you spend. So you could have, spending like 6 million or whatever it might be, but that 3.6 gets you to that $1 million cap per phase, which could be on a yearly. As Katie said, they looked at, the various keeping the credits versus selling them, and depending, on the time of year and whatnot, especially if you're working with Tax Credit Connection, how much you could get for selling those credits. Then the residential, again, depending on where you live, tax credits are a possibility. And then Katie briefly mentioned there is the federal state tax credits. It is a flat 20%, so it doesn't matter if you're rural or urban, you are getting 20%. The catch is that's different than the state is you have to be listed individually or contributing to the National Register. Always contact our office. We can definitely help determine what your designation status is. And then also the federal has, I guess, a lot more money than we do, obviously. And so there is not a cap on, how much you can get for that. And then the other part of my job is the leveraging funding. I love talking about timelines. Katie kind of hinted on that. So be realistic. And I use the realistic loosely. We have some people are like, I can have my whole project done in a year. And, we're like, okay. In reality, though, it's probably going to take more like 2 years. So be flexible. knowing that, you have to worry about supply chains and demand, what's going to be available, what's not going to be available. And, say you do come in for a grant, like Katie alluded to this October, you might not get it since it's competitive. And if you're really counting on that funding, you might have to wait an additional 6 months to, apply again. So it's always helpful to talk with our office. Again, I love talking about timelines. And then if you have your different incentives lined up, we can always factor those in too. So that is my short and sweet. This is what I do, and then my information, but I'm pretty sure Ariel and them will share that in the end too. So that's what I got. Back to you, Ariel.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That's fantastic. I'm going to share my screen to show you the website for the Colorado Brownfields Incentive. So one moment. Okay, so here is the Colorado Brownfields program. The website is cdphe.colorado.gov/brownfields. So within this site, you have lots of information, and there's 3 main funding sources that are available through here. There's a Colorado Brownfields grant. If you can get the EPA one, go for the EPA one because it's bigger. But if you can't get that, as you saw in Katie's slide, she had the Colorado Brownfields grant as a backup plan. The Colorado Brownfields grant is eligible for nonprofits, non-federal government entities, so counties, municipalities. You can't. The National Park Service can't come in for a Colorado Brownfields grant. Watershed and community organizations, and then if you have formal support of one of the above with a clear public or economic benefit. So it sounds like you may be able to apply as a private entity, but you have to have formal support from a nonprofit or a government entity. So make sure you understand what that third bullet means. It's right down here. We go to it. Make sure if you're going to try to qualify under that one, this is the one I'm talking about right here. So I'm going to read that as meaning that includes a private entity, but double check that if you're getting ready to apply. I think the door is open with that one. The second program that they have is the site assessments. So much like the EPA site assessments, the state has those as well. So that's another resource for you if you aren't able to get a site assessment covered through the EPA. And then the third one is a revolving loan fund. And so they have a certain amount of money available every year that kind of goes in and out of the loan fund as the people who borrow pay it back. It's at a lower interest rate and they have flexible terms, and they're also just a little easier to work with than a bank as far as collateral and things like that. So those are the 3 that are available. And again, I mentioned Fonda Apostolopoulos from Colorado Public Health and Environment. It is really easy to work with, and he works with some of these programs. There is a tax credit. The reason I'm not talking much about it, and we can talk about it during the discussion period, is because we have a whole webinar we did on just specifically the tax credit. So, but there is a tax credit just like the historic. So I am going to now ask our 2 presenters, our 2 government presenters, about a question that we had in the chat, which is which of these programs cannot play well together? As you saw from Sarah's slide, the historic ones, you can actually get the grant and use that grant money towards your tax credit. I do know that for Colorado Brownfields credits, you cannot use your Brownfield money to get a tax credit for the same expenses. But beyond that, I don't know where they do and don't play well together. So do either Ted or Sarah know the answer to that question?
I'm just going to that question so I can see real quick. Sorry. But Sarah, feel free to jump in if you've got, offhand. So from by one of the designs of the EPA program and the EPA resources is to kind of start the redevelopment process. And by pursuing the cleanup grants and the assessment funding, it's sort of the first phase in all of that. And the idea with the grants is really that it's kind of like seed money to pursue other funding sources. So to my knowledge, I don't believe it precludes you from pursuing any other of these tax credits. I think it can only help showing that you have other resources that you've committed to the project. And we've seen multiple former grant recipients move forward by applying to different tax credits, leveraging millions and millions of dollars to their project. And I found that the EPA original grant can really help like jumpstart that process.
I'll go off of what Ted said. Yeah, we really like, at least especially with the State Historical Fund grants, if you can leverage various grants. With ours, the scope of work needs to be aligned for that to be considered the cash match component of it. But that cleanup and those removal of hazardous materials are certainly qualified expenses for both programs. The catch with the tax credits for the state is, say, this cleanup phase is your first phase. You have to be able to open for, be able to generate revenue at the end of the phase. So state tax preservation tax credits as a first phase might not be ideal for your circumstance, but it's certainly something to chat about and make sure that's the determination.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Why don't we have our participants introduce themselves briefly if you're able to unmute yourself, and I'll just kind of call out your names so we can do it in a little organized fashion. Stephen, would you like, oh, Jean, you look like you unmuted. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, Jean?
Sure. My name is Gene Christ, and I work with a company that sells heating and air conditioning equipment. We have some environmental issues on our property, and I was listening in to hear if there were some funding sources that might be available, but I don't think we qualify for brownfield, being it was a property and the contamination was here prior to us purchasing the property, just hadn't been identified. So it sounds like I'm striking out, quite frankly, on what I was hoping to hear about here, because it is it's a private piece of, it's a private business that's functioning just fine. We just had this contamination. So I don't know that any of the funding sources are appropriate in this case, or at least the stuff that was introduced today. So.
There could be potential, kind of depending on what contamination you're dealing with. Ariel mentioned the state's Brownfields Revolving Loan Fund, and that is designed specifically for the private sector. And so they have loans available, low interest, and Ariel said kind of like flexible collateral loans for the contamination. So that could be an option that you might want to pursue.
Yep, and I appreciate that, Ted. I think we're just going to incur a bunch of costs to do this, and so.
Yeah, fair.
But
fair.
the loan route is probably not what we want to do. We want to just get this done, and thankfully we have the financial resources to probably handle it. But it certainly can be a drain on us. But I do appreciate the time listening in, and also it was good to hear about the the project in Buena Vista and the historical value there, and so yeah, very very interesting call today. So.
Jean, oh, go ahead.
I just want to chime in that I'm always about making money on a project, whether you have the financial means or not. So if you have an address for your building, and if it's designated, that process is for the state tax credits. You can apply at any time and at least get some money back. So you're not down and out on all of it.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're not that historical, so.
Oh darn.
Yeah, so I listened in intently. I'm trying to I don't want to call it a loophole, but trying to find something that applies. But I don't think such a thing does. But I appreciate the time to listen in on it. So thank you.
Jean, I think the Colorado Brownfields tax credits might apply for you, because going through that's just fine for private entities. There's no problem with that. You need to go through the voluntary cleanup program. So it sounds like you would qualify for the voluntary cleanup program because you were not the party that created the contamination. And as long as you're comfortable doing an entire site characterization, which means, if you have some kind of contamination in the building, you still have to check your groundwater and soil and those kinds of things. If you don't have any concerns about doing that extra phase 2 work, the tax credits very well would work for you. So I would love to talk to you more about that and get you introduced to Fonda So let's connect on that.
And we've actually been working with Fonda. We are connected. We are in the VCAP.
Oh,
so,
good.
yeah, so we'll,
Great.
I was just listening in for an update and see if something has changed since before. But anyway, but thank you.
Fantastic. Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Stephen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everybody. Really great presentation. I've been learning a lot. My name's Stephen Mumblow. I'm a K-12 school consultant with Cooperative Strategies. We just started work in Colorado in 2018, but we do work nationwide, long range facility master planning and assessments for the most part. And I'm really interested in kind of adding an environmental lens to our assessment work and helping districts really look at all their options, especially if they have more historical buildings, like in BV. I was actually part of the team that built the middle school, high school shared campus down there that just opened. So love those guys. Lisa and the DSI crew all did great work over there. And yeah, in college, I helped start a revolving energy loan fund on my campus at the University of Montana. So even though I'm in project management for schools, the environmental policy angle has always been a passion of mine. So really good stuff today. Thanks again for including me.
Thank you so much. Jennifer, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'll try. I'm not, can you hear me?
We sure can.
Okay. So I am down in Durango, Colorado. I'm a private landowner that is consolidating with the end goal of about 700 to 800 acres of open space, agricultural land, wildlife corridors, archaeological preservation for conservation easement to be left for the community to be used in education, research, health, and human services. So we have worked with the Historical Society or Historical Preservation in a grant for the archaeological, one of the archaeological areas. We did a survey, and so I'm kind of checking back in on how we can carry forward. I unfortunately defaulted on that property in the first acquisition of it. So we're back at it, and we'd like to get that actually moved more forward. Sarah, in registry, in the National Registry, we have another 80 acres to be surveyed, and probably to see how I can get another grant to get that surveyed or to assist in that survey, and then establishment. And if there's some additional funding to establish those as a district and to assist in the consolidation of that land into this easement would be greatly appreciated. And then my questions for Ted were that we have there are oil and gas, there are gas wells, natural gas wells throughout a lot of this acreage. There is one that we have noted had contaminated some surface springs, and that was held by Red Willow, and Red Willow sort of looked at it and said, oh, that's not our problem. The water going in the fracking isn't the same that's coming out of the spring. And you're like, well, yeah, that's because it's gone through 3,000 feet of ground. But I was going to see if we could check in and get some assessments done from the EPA on some of these oil and gas wells, especially as we will probably reclaim them to go into this conservation easement. Okay, so that's what we're doing down there. And Ariel's been very great as we move through this. We did get the first 180 acres officially with La Plata Open Space Conservancy, but we're looking to consolidate the other 600 or 700 acres.
Ted, do you mind taking that first? Then maybe Sarah can give any insights too.
Yeah, it's a little complicated sometimes with, you know, oil and gas operations and kind of how they align with sort of the brownfields funding, partially just because our funding is designed to support the redevelopment of properties, and sometimes with oil and gas direct cleanups, there may not be that. And it's also, they're often privately owned. So it's not always impossible, and sometimes there can be some great projects on like abandoned, oil and gas projects. But maybe the best thing to do is just to chat offline and see how it might work.
Yeah, because the acres that we're going to put in there, Ted, are part of a wetlands
Yeah, right.
area that we're
Okay.
trying to rejuvenate. That's basically the end run of all the agricultural land. And they come into a couple gas well sites. And this spring that appears definitely to be contaminated. It's been killing off acres.
Yeah.
Each year it decreases. Each year we lose probably another 100 feet of pinyon juniper forest that really has no other reason to be dying.
Right.
And so, it definitely will be impacting. And of course, the end result is to return it to its wild state, but at least either mitigate the continued contamination, or if it has any way of us assisting in consolidating that property into the easement.
Great. Well, I'm so glad. I hope you got Ted's contact information or maybe you could put it in the chat, Ted,
I
so
sure
that
can.
everyone
Yeah, I'll
has
do
it
it right now.
handy. That'd be great. Sarah, do you have any insights to add on to what Jennifer was talking about?
I guess one thing that wasn't really touched on in the presentations was you can apply for as many grants as you want or need to complete a project. So even if it's on the same site or different sites, we can definitely do another archaeological assessment. And then from there, we can move into if, based on those reports and results, if, excavations needed or further further, work. And a report and assessment is always a great start to moving towards designation, whether that be at the state or the national. So you can contact me and then, we can continue the conversations, and I can connect you with the appropriate people and give you the right forms.
Okay. Yeah, we greatly appreciate that. One of the parts of when you say excavation, because these are absolutely undisturbed sites for 1,000 years, we're not planning on excavating them because their value is their non-disturbance factor. But I'll be connecting with you and see if we can just keep going forward on those grants then. Wonderful.
Excellent. I just want to take a moment to thank all of our presenters. You all did a fantastic job today. I'm so appreciative to our participants who have interesting projects they're working on, and everyone's contributing in their way to making Colorado even better. So let's have this be the beginning, and you reach out to the folks that you can partner with to make your projects happen. And as I'm sure I'm always happy to talk to you about anything that we can help with and help to connect you to folks as well. So I hope everyone enjoys their day. If you enjoyed this and you think there's anyone else who would benefit from watching it, like we said, we've recorded it and we'll make it available to anybody who's interested. So thanks again for your time and have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.